everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on the second discussion of 3, all about tapping into ambition, where we'll be exploring how we can rethink the way that we attract, retain and invest with workforce talent. I'm Becky Norman, I'm the editor of TrainingZone and TrainingZone, and I'm one of the co-hosts for this event, which is brought to you by the Open University in partnership with TrainingZone. Now, this second session we're on, we'll be exploring the retain strand of tapping into ambition. If you didn't see our first session earlier this morning on talent attraction, don't worry, you can still be here, you can watch the session in isolation, but we will also send all registrants a copy of that session by the end of this week, so you can rewatch that in your own time. But back to this session that we're in now. As I said, we're going to be focusing on retention, which I'm sure many of you can agree is a big challenge at the moment in your organisation, and businesses really need to be laser focused on this issue and exploring new ways of helping to retain their people. So for the next 45 minutes, we're going to be looking at that, and we're going to be looking specifically at how learning can help retain people and in an inclusive way as well. Before we dive into that discussion and get you to know our panellists, I'd like to bring your attention to the group chat. If it's not already opened up on your dashboard already, you can click on it. It's the blue speech bubble icon at the bottom. Just click on that, open it up. I am here as your representative on the panel. I'm the voice of the audience. I've got my iPad here. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the group chat and bringing that conversation into the discussion. So please do share your thoughts, your opinions, ask questions that we can put to the panelists today. I think that's about everything from me, but before I hand over to my co-host, we do have a question already for you to get the chat moving. And that is, what 3 words come to your head when you think of ambition? Now, if you were in the first session, yes, we did ask this question before, but perhaps your answers may have changed. It'll be interesting to see. But while we wait for those words to come through from you on the group chat, I'm going to hand over to my co-host, award-winning industry analyst, Laura Overton.
Becky, thank you so much. And yes, a warm welcome from me as well. We really do want to hear what the word ambition means to you personally. So please get writing, get sharing, because that's the heart, the bedrock of all of our conversations for today. And so with that in mind, Etty, welcome. And what does the word ambition mean to you personally? What 3 words would you summarize your thoughts on ambition?
I gave this an awful lot of thought, and my first one I would say is progression. Progression, not in the linear sense that we generally tend to understand. It's all about promotion and the next and the next and the next, but really about exposure to experiences and progressing within an organisation. So you don't have to be stuck in the same role all the time. The second I would say is fulfilment, and for me that's all about doing what you love, but also loving what you do, especially as sometimes a role isn't glamorous 100% of the time. So it sustains you, loving what you do and doing what you love. And then finally, realization that we can look as we're progressing through the journey and recognize and realize that you've achieved something, not just for yourself, but also for your organization, your stakeholders. In my case, it was building my own business.
Great. So it's kind of progression, fulfillment, realization, that aha moment. So hopefully we'll have lots of aha moments as we have the conversation today. So thank you for that. Paul, welcome. What are your 3 words?
Thanks, Laura. Again, I gave some thought to this, Etty. So firstly, vision. Secondly, growth. Thirdly, determination. So if I can just explain. Vision, not necessarily to the end goal, but potentially to the next step. Growth, of course, not just learning and development, but mindset. And thirdly, determination, the determination to achieve the best that you can on the good days as well as the not so good days.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And again, it's like having that determination, that growth mindset that actually we're really looking to bring to this agenda today to say, oh, I've got a fly on the stage, bring to the agenda today to say, okay, well, how can we really shift our thinking about how we retain people? So tapping into that personal ambition is going to be so important. And already we've got so many different words, but Becky, what else does personal ambition mean to us today?
Yeah, well, a lot of people here are echoing, so growth, progression, fulfillment, so great to see those. One from Chris that I thought was a little bit different, balance, cyclical and conversation.
Ooh,
so I really liked that
Chris,
one.
Thank you for that one, yeah.
Yeah, future, satisfaction, creative, bold.
Brilliant.
So lots of stuff coming in. Thank you, everyone. Keep it coming.
Absolutely, and we'd like some creative, bold conversation and chat going on in the chat room as well. So do add your questions in as we go through this today. I think it's really interesting. From the earlier session, I had 3 words, but I would actually kind of change them a little bit. There were aspects of family ambition that came through this morning, and it's not just about our own ambition, but the ambition that we have on behalf of other people that are around us, and the impact, I think, was also a critical one. And Sophie this morning talked about discovery. So I think I'll add in exploration for me, because we're all on a journey, and particularly in this topic today, when we're looking at retention, there aren't any tried and trusted solutions here. So we're exploring together with the audience about what it means to be creative about thinking about learning. Before we do that, though, what do we think are some of the challenges in retention at the moment? And Paul, I know you're working here at the OU. Let me go to you first on that. You know, what are some of the retention challenges we face? And actually, let us know your retention challenges as well in the chat room. We would love to know some of the challenges that you've got about retaining people in this world of work that we've got at the moment. So, Paul.
Yeah, and I think we all see them every single day. Certainly in the higher education sector, it's a sector that's going through tremendous transformation, tremendous change at the moment, and really retaining the capability to weather those changes and fit for the future. Back to the future word that you had there, Becky, is a huge challenge. In other sectors, notably hospitality and travel, we read about it every day. It's the capacity to serve the customers that's the biggest challenge. But I think there is good news. I think those organisations who've got strong value propositions, of which development and ambition as part of that, are the ones that will win through in the end.
Absolutely. And I think some of the research that's coming out are literally around the globe. You've got the Pew Research in America, you've got the work that McKinsey's doing on a global basis is showing that this talk of the great resignation, or as McKinsey talks about it, the great attrition, is actually a reality that most organizations are facing at the moment. And I think it was something like, one of the statistics was 70% of us were considering, particularly in IT, were considering that maybe we might be changing our role in the next 6 months. 70%. There is another statistic that says 20%, which is actually more like across all of the different sectors of us might need to or want to change our role. And some are even leaving without a new job because of the challenges that they're facing. Eti, are you seeing this in some of the organisations that you've been working with as well? What kind of retention problems are you seeing?
Well, they tend to be in the organisations that I work with are usually highly skilled knowledge workers. That's not to say that, manufacturing or production companies also suffer from similar problems, but the whole knowledge worker and the highly skilled workforce where everybody's fighting over the same talent. And so what tends to happen is you attract the talent, you recruit it and you bring it in, but the very things that bring people in aren't necessarily what pushes them out of the door eventually. And eventually we all leave and we all move on, but we want to be able to get something of value something of mutual value, both for the individual and for us. So that retention piece, there are certain things that I can't possibly know when I take the job. I can take a number of things at face value, and then you're within the organisation, and all those things that I was talking about, you know, the ability to progress or be exposed to experiences or talk to various people suddenly doesn't materialise. That then starts to compromise how I feel about staying with that organisation. Do I have that chance to move, progress, contribute?
You know, and the research actually is saying exactly that. Nearly 50% of those who've left their jobs in the last 6 months are saying that they've left. It's not because of pay as such, but it's because they haven't been valued by the organisation. They don't feel as though they've been valued by their managers, and they don't feel as though they've had the opportunity for that progression. So I don't think you're alone in having some of those thoughts, seeing your customers. The statistics are really bearing that out.
And one other small addition to that is that most major organisations are continually doing engagement surveys and satisfaction surveys. And when we think of engagement, it's that discretional effort that people put in above and beyond what they're paid to do. But we pay very little attention to that. We'll sort of huddle and have lots of focus groups and do the analysis on what the engagement survey revealed, but we tend not to do too much with it.
About what it means.
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
It means. Absolutely. I'm sure, Becky, that some of these themes are bubbling up in the chat room. So tell us a little bit more about what our amazing audience are struggling with right now so that we can get to grips with that.
Yeah, so I think, you know, a lot of people are coming through with no surprises here, really, leaving for higher salary or better bonuses elsewhere, but also lack of career progression, no room to grow internally within the business, no opportunities there for progression. And a couple of interesting points as well around culture, which I think is more and more important for people in the current climate. You know, people aren't putting up with a toxic culture anymore. They will leave and they will look for a business that has something better, where they feel more valued and that they know other people are valued and respected as well.
Yeah. You know what, I think that's such a valid point. We really want to say thank you for raising that with us, because a lot of the research is actually showing us that there are starting to be some generational differences with that. And 25% of the workforce now are Gen Z, born post-1995. And I read some research recently that 80% of that age group would be willing to leave their job within the first 6 months if that connection of belonging and kind of feeling included within that organisation, the culture, the values of that is a massive proportion of people who potentially could walk out of the door within the first 6 months. So I think it's something that probably is worth our while digging into what we can do with that. And obviously we're at the OU, so we want to kind of explore how learning can influence that. So Etty, I'm just wondering what your view is of how organisations at the moment are currently kind of embracing learning. What's the typical kind of status quo of learning in organisations right now before we start to tie it into the retention area?
We know that there's a plethora of really great learning. A lot of it is free. I've taken full advantage of what the OU offers to anybody. And speaking as a learning and development professional, so I've kind of put myself in that tribe, we sometimes operate on the basis that if we build it, they will come. And that provided we put out there tons and tons of content, that somehow we're achieving, and that's what we equate with learning. And yet we know that by itself and unsupported, and when I say unsupported, I also mean managers to support it, to embed it in the workplace, can make people feel somehow isolated and unable to determine, so where do I start? I don't know if that makes sense. I come across that quite a lot. So we may be content rich, we may be technology rich, and we can have lots of conversations around that, but having a conversation around organisational performance and individual performance and pulling those things together, which plays to all of those other complexities about people feeling valued and that they're making a valid contribution.
I think certainly in my own research I would really see that as kind of bubbling up. And typically learning in an organisation, and we've certainly seen that, and I don't know about you as an audience whether you've seen this as well, that with the pressure on organisations, typically learning and development has been a cost centre for the business. And, you know, if the pressure's coming in, that's where the money's taken away. Or we've been the course deliverer for the business. Or as you say, Etty, the content deliverer for the business. And I've seen a lot of my own research and the ongoing research is most learning professionals are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, definitely under-resourced in that particular environment. So I kind of see at the moment, in my own experience, learning as a resource rather than learning, as Simon said this morning, a kind of proactive corporate commitment to that personal ambition of individuals. Paul, I'd like to come to you in a moment, but first of all, I'd quite like to ask the audience about the extent to which learning is seen as that proactive corporate commitment, that is seen as a learning as a benefit for organisations that can attract people and retain people. So, Becky, do we have a poll that we can perhaps explore a little bit more?
Yeah, we do. So coming up on your screen now should be a poll, and we want to know what learning opportunities are you proactively giving to your people to tap into personal ambition. So that could be qualifications, that could be content libraries for your workers, content libraries for workers and families, or it could be secondments experience, or if it's none of those and something else completely, please do tell us in the group chat. Let's keep that conversation going. And while we wait for those poll results, I'll hand back to Laura.
Yeah, no, we really are keen to find out what you're doing at the moment, because, you know, when we think about a lot of corporate benefits that are offered to people as part of the attraction process that we looked at earlier, you know, there's quite a few that we talk about publicly, Paul, you know, in terms of the benefits that we offer, health benefits and, you know, sort of, I think, Becky, you were telling me about, like, helping fund a cycle to cycle into there's a whole range of different benefits that are kind of coming through now. But what kind of benefits are you offering as an organisation to your staff in that context?
I think the key one that we're probably most famous for is our staff fee waiver for any of the degree programmes that we, and indeed other programmes that we offer to our students. And as you saw in the opening VT, when we're talking to our students, we talk very much around setting your ambitions free. And of course, that should be the same for our people. And we have to stand by that. Our staff fee waiver, we spend a substantial amount of investment on that each year, and it has a huge effect on retention. Alongside that, we're starting to really ramp up our internal apprenticeships as well, which is fantastic, and a lot of my team are upweighting their coaching qualifications through the apprenticeship process. I think the thing that we often see, Laura, is the outputs of those aren't quantifiable in terms of finances, in terms of money. So buying a bicycle to get to work is a certain amount. So I think that's why we don't necessarily talk about it as much as we could do. Of course, we're fortunate at the OU that I hope most people that work at the Open University are learn-it-alls, and that's the reason, and therefore the added benefit of partaking in the wonderful tuition that the OU offers is a key part of the attraction and the benefit to retain as well.
I think it's really interesting there, because what you're talking about is sort of very similar to the Uber example that we heard in the previous session, where Uber are actually offering their drivers their Uber Pro program of loyalty, the opportunity to study with the OU for free, either for them as individuals or from their family. And that was a really interesting idea to explore, about offering and opening up that opportunity to even up or to change your educational qualifications that you have. So to what extent has that actually worked for you here, before we go on to the poll results, which hopefully we can bring up in a moment?
Well, I mean, it's fantastic because, of course, in the same way that Uber have demonstrated, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the discipline in which you work. So, of course, that means we can cross-pollinate across the whole organisation. And as a further extension of that, we're seeing a lot of communities of interest starting to grow, particularly since the pandemic. But they're growing and growing and growing, not necessarily within specific areas of interest, but across different specialties, and even across outside and bringing other people from other organisations in as well. So it's actually forming new ways of learning at the same time.
Yeah, no, that's great. So one experience is then creating and deepening that learning culture that you have within the organisation. Thank you for that. Becky, what are we doing in the audience, in terms of being proactive in this space?
Yeah, so I'd say the one that's coming out on top, just under a third, are using generic content libraries for workers. But we've also got nearly a quarter offering external qualifications. And we've also got 20% offering secondments and experience. And it's really interesting to see that number, actually, because a company that springs to mind that is doing learning as a benefit really well is a tech startup called Youngo Solutions, who was actually one of our Culture Pioneers Awards winner for the learning category last year. And now they were aware that they can offer the same kind of salary as their competitors. So they came up with some really progressive policies, learning policies, to bring in to support their workers and to retain them. So one of those was Everyone is an Apprentice, which enabled everyone, no matter where they were in the business, to go and do an apprenticeship program. So that really opened up opportunities for everyone and was a really inclusive approach. But also they offered employees portfolio careers. So, if they wanted to pursue something else, they could go and do that side hustle, they could go and do that other project, work for another company while still working for Youngo. So I thought that was a really great way of boosting their employee value proposition and also bringing those skills that they were learning elsewhere back into the business, a win-win situation.
Absolutely, and I bet you everyone who works at Youngo actually feels valued and feels respected and feels that they're part of that culture because they've been given that permission. And I think that's very similar, Paul, to what you were saying in terms of providing that education qualification as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And permission is a huge thing, I think. Absolutely.
You know what? I would love to kind of raise the elephant in the room with you, if I may, because I hear a lot in my career that if we say, okay, we're going to train people and give them these opportunities, then they'll leave us. And it's just going to cause even more of a great resignation problem. Is that true, do you think, in your experiences? If you train people, they're just going to walk out the door or not? Etty, come and tell us what you really think. It's just us.
Okay. I always remember from my early days in HR was around this, we should be looking at retention as part of your recruitment strategy. So they're not done in isolation. It's not a silo activity. And in fact, we should be also thinking in terms of re-recruiting every day. That's part of your retention and your ongoing engagement. Just because we've gone to the trouble and expense, and it's a scary statistic around if people leave within 6 months, I would hate to think what that recruitment budget is.
Yeah.
Because it's an ongoing treadmill, but that's another conversation. Is that re-recruiting every day is keeping people engaged, retained, not just valued. It's just being part of the machinery, if you will. So I was always told that you re-recruit every day, otherwise somebody else will be recruiting them.
Yeah.
Because if they really are talent, and the other thing that sort of followed on from that, sorry to go on, is that if we're creating mobility within the organisation, that's great. But sometimes that mobility takes them out of the organisation. But guess what? They're actually advocates for your organisation. So they can be another way in for attracting other talent or referrals, or you're creating a bit of a virtuous circle.
Yeah. And we talked earlier about the reputation, that being proactive in committing to learning as a benefit rather than just learning as a knee-jerk reaction actually does for your own corporate identity and reputation and brand as well. I mean, I'd love to find out from the room, those of you who are offering some of these things proactively, you know, what makes it work? What hints and tips have you got for each other to actually start to kind of leverage some of these opportunities? So do share that in the room, and please do keep your questions coming for us as a panel as well. So with that in mind, Becky, have we got some stuff coming in from the room?
Yeah, just a
well?
question on, I mean, people are saying they love that recruiting every day comment that you made, Etty, but Vasu asked, what does recruiting every day really mean? Could you kind of dive into that a little bit more, what that would look like practically?
It would take too long, and that's the sort of work that I do with my clients. But it's really not just understanding what's valuable to your organisation, but what's also invaluable to your employees. What are the things that they value? If it's the bike, that they haven't got the upfront payment to get on the road, then that would be invaluable for them. So it isn't just about what's good for the organisation, it's also about what's invaluable to them. And again, we just come back to this, just because we put out a great smorgasbord of learning, maybe that doesn't just sustain by itself. It's, you know, managers who are well equipped to have that conversation. I think I heard the word conversation earlier on. Managers who are equipped and confident to have those conversations, because they're people too, and they have aspirations and they have visions and they want to progress. And we sometimes kind of forget they can be a bit of the meat in the sandwich. They get it from all sides. So, but they're actually the secret tool in motivating, rewarding, and just generally getting the best performance out of their people. That's what I mean by re-recruiting. You have to know and tap into what each individual values. The value of anything is the benefit it delivers. Yeah.
I think that's so important. I'm interested, Paul, about how that works out for you here in the OU in terms of the whole system connecting with your policy.
And I love your smorgasbord, because I mean we've got a huge amount of content, and I think the key thing is around. We talked about permission firstly, giving people the permission to be able to search for what's useful for them. Enabling and empowering the managers, like you say, to support that. And then thirdly, as L&D, I think we've touched on it before, and organisational learning, which is my team, is very much around how do we bridge the gap between that and the organisation's needs, which in our case are making sure we've got the capability and capacity to deliver our priorities for the future. So actually that bridging that gap for us is as much about stewardship and helping people find out what's available and how to access it as much as anything.
You know what, that actually is very much linked into Peter Senge's work on the learning organisation, about having that clarity of priorities, that clarity of purpose within the team, having the sense of process as well, in that right process, knowing what to do and how, and we talked about that earlier as well, and that permission then, that kind of concept of team learning and the opportunity for us to learn and to work together. So I think that's very, very powerful in terms of some practical ways that we can consider how to do this. Becky, is there anything else that's kind of coming through in terms of some hints and tips on how we can kind of embrace learning as a benefit in our organisations?
I mean, there's some questions coming through, so maybe we can push.
We opened up a can of worms.
Yes. So, I mean, this is quite a big question, but I think we can put it back into the retention strand. So Chris is asking, what does the panel think about L&D over the coming 10 years? What will change? What will the trends be? But I'd like to kind of rein that into retention specifically and how we see L&D becoming more involved with being part of employee retention.
Do you want to go first?
Come to you on that.
Thanks. I think there's a couple of comments that I would make about that. I think talk about recruiting every day. I think there is something to be said for a through flow of talent through an organisation as well. So there's a balance between retention and actually helping people move on through their career, and therefore helping the organisation innovate and do things differently as well. I think it absolutely will. I think we talked about Gen Z a little bit earlier, and very high on the, not that I am, but obviously, so I'm told by my children and by people that work for me who are Gen Z. Learning and development is key, absolutely key. How am I going to progress? Where does my future look, and how will I get there? And I think any organisation that can help solve that problem is going to really, really benefit from that.
And actually, we had a comment earlier when we were talking about retention challenges where people were saying we're finding that younger people coming in, they want to progress really quickly, and we're not able to offer that progression at pace.
And then if they leave the organisation, then they can get that experience, and say if it's a good experience with the organisation they've left, they may come back to be able to offer that through as well.
Can I come back to, because, looking 10 years out, who can do that? Well, we can't see past the end of this year at the moment.
I know, yeah.
But I think the role of L&D will need to pick up pace. And what I mean by that is we're not in the business, or shouldn't be any longer, in the business of upskilling. We play a pivotal role in the strategic outcomes of an organisation, and we need to be much more comfortable with having conversations around business outcomes, the type of workforce that will help us to achieve those outcomes, also known as workforce planning from a HR perspective, and then being very clear about how we go about delivering that. So our strategy is around not just what we upskill, but also how do we create and nurture the workforce that will achieve the ultimate goals.
That's such a valid point there, because what I've found in my own research about high-performing learning teams is where the walls are starting to come down. And in many organisations, the walls have come down between talent, workforce planning, OD, learning and development. And they've been focusing instead on the priority of how do we keep the best people in our organisation? How do we attract the best people, and how do we make sure that their experience is consistent and have the right processes, priorities, permissions, and those things we can do in small teams as well as in the kind of large corporate strategies. So I think wherever we're sitting in our field, we can start to have that conversation with others about, do you have this problem? How can we work on it together? I'd really like to kind of explore, I mean, we're here at the OU, you've found innovators of harnessing technology to increase access, to increase inclusion. And yet many of us in learning and development look at technologies and say, actually, we've got these big content libraries. And Becky, I'm not quite sure if I remember rightly that percentage of us offering those content libraries through to our teams as part of our learning as a benefit. It was quite high,
29%.
So 3 in 10 of us are offering that. Is that going to work? Is that actually going to, just by offering that technology, that wide range of content, will that work in terms of tapping into ambition? Or do we need to perhaps add a little bit of extra magic into that formula? Etty, what are your thoughts?
Here's the other thing. From a learning and development perspective, we need to also learn to market ourselves much more effectively. So if we go back to that principle of if we build it, they will come, and isn't L&D wonderful, and you can just help yourself day or night, since you can access it any time you want. It's about much more than that for me. And so being able to market not just all the content that we bring, but how we play that pivotal role with the business, with the managers, with the individuals.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds tough if you're a small, medium organisation and there's only one or two of you in the L&D team, because I've worked with teams like that as well. Yeah. But if we need to feel comfortable with two things that we haven't been very good at in the past. One is being proactive, and you kind of think to yourself, oh my gosh, that's too hard. I've already got so much to do. Why would I want to go out looking for more? That's how we learn. That's how we stay ahead of the curve. And the other is ambiguity. The days when you could lovingly spend 6 months crafting a new course, that's now obsolete.
The need for speed.
The need for speed. I need it now.
Yeah.
And you raised a really interesting point that somebody put in the chat, which was around the younger people. They want to progress quickly. Well, sometimes there's a virtue in learning how to be patient and develop an inner patience as well. So it's not horses for courses necessarily.
Yeah, and good luck with that one.
I get it. I've
exactly.
got 2 granddaughters at university, so yeah.
But Paul, I'm also interested because Etty's touching on the fact that actually learning isn't just about being given knowledge, but it's also about being given opportunity to explore and to practice. And I think that's always been one of the things that has really caught my imagination about the way that people go through the OU programs is, their opportunity to explore. What kind of impact has that had with your teams and the fact that they've had this opportunity to have the fee waiver, but what does it mean in terms of their skill and in terms of their growth and their progress?
Yeah, and I think without being the magician that reveals the tricks up his sleeve, one of the things that we try and build into particularly our organisational learning internally, is a 3-stage process around building competency and the skills to do the job, building confidence to perform in that role. And then the 3rd stage is contribution. How do I contribute back to the organisation, whether that's through direct performance, but most importantly, through developing others. So actually what we're trying to do is, it's not just about the 30-odd people that work in organisational learning, it's about the whole organisation amplifying what's available and stewarding. So back to your point about the managers being the meat in the sandwich, that's a critical part of how we unlock all those people around them, is that they feel confident to steward learning for other people as well.
Yeah, I think some of the data that is out there actually helps us to make that case, internally make that business case for change, or at least to be able to open up the conversation. So I'm hoping that kind of, those ideas explored some of the answers that you were looking for there. Becky, are there any other thoughts or questions that are coming up from the room about how we make this happen?
Well, there's a lot of comments at the moment going on around culture and the role of culture in employee retention, talking about a learning culture, curiosity culture, and a culture of learning from mistakes, which I think is really interesting. And it springs to mind actually Novartis, who are obviously really focused on building a culture of curiosity. Laura, I'm sure you could do a much better job of outlining the kind of things that Novartis have been doing.
Actually, just as you were saying that, that was exactly the organisation that was in my mind as well, because I think for them the culture really started from the top, in the same way that the culture for Uber's kind of direction of supporting their workers and their drivers came from the top. So Vas, the CEO, really felt that Novartis needed to be an organisation moving forward that harnessed technology, that harnessed curiosity. It wasn't just about knowledge and expertise, but about exploring if they were going to be able to get those new solutions to the medical requirements that we've got in the industry. And they have a three-pronged cultural challenge, which is kind of, I think, being inspired, I think, is one, unbossed and curious. So they've kind of got those values set in, they've got the vision from the CEO set in, but then they do offer those content libraries, but they offer them not only to individuals, but it's in that context of this is who we need to be as an organisation, and how can you contribute? And what I also love about what Novartis are doing is that they also extended that out to family. And particularly during the lockdown period, you know, that their families had the opportunity to explore these new skills, that their kids had opportunity to dig into the Khan Academy. Because actually, when we've got resources already to hand, using them more creatively, particularly when we're using technology, allows us to extend that opportunity to others. So, great question and great conversation coming through. I know that we're running out of time a little bit now, so I'd love to ask you again in the audience if there's anything that's kind of stood out for you, that you, a takeaway, an aha moment from Etty's point earlier, a revelation from this conversation today that you think you'd like to pin down. So please use the chat room to do that. And as you're doing that, Etty, any aha moments, any kind of takeaways from you that you feel that we really need to be moving forward to take this from a conversation into action?
No, I would just sort of build on the comment that was made earlier on about the walls are coming down between these silos of L&D, talent development, organisational, and we're in the business of the same thing. We all want the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it should be seamless, it should be integrated, it should also be very interconnected. What I liked about preparing for today was the attraction, retention, investment, and it's a circular process.
Yeah.
It's ongoing and it never stops.
Yeah. That continual recruitment, as you say. Thank you for that. Paul, what about you?
Yeah, I think...
Some takeaways for us.
I think probably every organisation that's here wants to help their people set their ambitions free. And I think our job, and indeed our obligation, is to help them to do that and show them how.
Absolutely. And when we set people free, then they feel safe. They feel valued, they feel respected, and they're more likely to stay. So... paradox there, but I think one that's proven time and time again. Thank you from me on this, and thank you for your contributions from the audience. But Becky, over to you and to our marvellous audience. How are they summing things up now?
Yeah, I think everyone's just really loving the re-recruitment. I think that's the key takeaway that people are coming away with. So good work. And also culture and how that's key as well. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I think we've run out of time. I know there were some questions that we didn't get to. We will be paying attention to those. We'll be looking to address those in the next session. And also we will have a highlights paper coming out, which will be pulling in those questions and key takeaways. So I'm really sorry if we didn't get to all your questions, but they will be addressed in some format. Now, coming up, we have our third and final session that will be taking place at 3 p.m. UK time. So we'd love for you to be there. It's on our Invest session. So really, how can we really invest in people, in their, them as a whole person, and how can we do that in a way that taps into ambition. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in that third session. To access that, if you don't have the link to already, there's a next session icon at the bottom of your dashboard. So just click on that and click through to the link, and that will take you through. And as I said, that will be at 3 p.m. UK time. But for now, thank you so much, Laura, Etty and Paul. Fantastic insights. And thank you so much to the audience as well. I haven't been able to keep up with all the comments and the questions, but really appreciate it. And we hope you can join us later today. Thank you.